Story number 1. The Shadow in the Underground. Laura, a 32-year-old woman, was leaving work late on a cold Halloween night. The streets were empty, save for a few children running through the shadows in their costumes, and the wind rustled around every corner. She decided to take the last train at an underground station where she normally didn't wait alone. On the platform, lit only by a couple of flickering lights, the silence was absolute. As she waited, she heard footsteps in the distance, soft but steady, as if someone was slowly shuffling down the corridor. Soon, a tall, thin figure appeared at the end of the platform, a man in an old jacket and a hat that hid his face. Laura felt a chill. The man made no effort to approach her. He just stood still, watching her from a distance, with a strange, motionless air that made her nervous. Laura tried not to pay attention to him, pretending to look at her phone, but the tension was unbearable. She decided to move, and when she looked up, she noticed the man following her with his eyes. Suddenly, the stranger's face lit up briefly as one of the lights flickered, and Laura could see a wide, unnatural smile stretching across his face from side to side, no trace of emotion in his empty eyes. The train was finally approaching, and Laura breathed a sigh of relief. However, the strange man began to walk towards her, each step slow, as if he was enjoying her discomfort. Laura backed up until she was against the wall, her hands shaking as the train came to a stop. As soon as the doors opened, she entered the car without looking back, and with relief, she realized that he had not followed her. The train departed, and Laura exhaled, trying to calm herself. However, as she looked towards the other end of the car, her body froze. The man was there, standing by the door, with the same sinister smile that made her skin crawl. No other passengers seemed to notice her presence. The atmosphere became suffocating, and although she wanted to scream, no sound came out of her throat. With no other option, Laura tried to move towards the emergency door, hoping that the train would stop. But every step she took backwards, he followed, without breaking that chilling smile. Finally, the door of the carriage opened at an unknown stop, and Laura ran out onto the platform, only to find herself at a station she did not recognize. She looked around desperately, unable to find a way out. When she turned to go back to the train, she saw that it had already left, and the platform was empty. Only then did she notice a soft echo of footsteps behind her. With her heart about to burst, she turned slowly, and there he was, his smile even wider, illuminated by the last light left on in the station. The darkness swallowed the station, and the only sound left was the faint echo of that man's laughter. Laura was never found. Story number 2. Encounters in the Dark. Ever since I moved into this apartment, I'd felt something strange in the air, like an invisible presence was creeping through the cracks in the walls. I didn't think much of it at first. I assumed it was just nerves about being alone in a new place. But now I know I was wrong. It all started with small things, flickering lights, the sound of soft footsteps in the night, and the inexplicable feeling that someone was watching me in my room while I was trying to sleep. One night, I was lying down with the light off and about to fall asleep when I heard a soft rustling sound, like the rustle of fabric sliding across the floor. I sat up in bed, holding my breath. There was something in the corner, a dark shadow that seemed to move slightly, as if it were breathing. I turned on the bedside lamp, but there was nothing. I decided to think my imagination was playing tricks on me and forced myself to ignore it, but that only made things worse. The next few nights, the sound was clearer. It was a constant shuffling, like someone slowly shuffling their feet. But this time, it wasn't just in the corner. They would start moving around my bed slowly, circling me. Even under the sheets, I could feel the air turning cold as they passed, as if they were sucking the warmth out of the room as they went. One morning, after listening to those footsteps for hours, I felt a weight on the mattress, right next to my feet. I felt a chill run down my spine when I realized I wasn't alone. I dared to poke my head out from under the sheets, and there he was, at the foot of the bed. I couldn't make out a face, just a hunched figure, watching me, completely still. His breathing was irregular, as if it was costing him every breath. I closed my eyes and lay still, waiting for him to leave, but I heard the mattress creak as the figure began to crawl towards me, slowly, inch by inch. Each night was worse than the last. I woke up with scratches on my arms and bruises on my body. One night, I decided to speak to him in a low voice. "What do you want?" Instantly, the silence was absolute, oppressive, until I heard a voice, low and distorted, whisper in my ear. "You are mine." Story number 3. The Midnight Call. In the quiet suburb of Maplewood, neighbors enjoyed a peaceful life, where children played in the streets and families gathered in the gardens. However, all that changed with the arrival of a strange legend about a haunting call that was said to occur at midnight. The story told of a mysterious figure who contacted people through their phones, a being who could take the form of someone you knew, and whose call brought with it a terrifying fate. Sarah, a 17-year-old teenager, did not believe in superstitions. When her friends, Kevin and Lisa, told her about the midnight call, she laughed. "It's just an urban legend," she told them. "There's nothing to fear." However, as the nights passed, the idea began to unsettle her. Still, her bravery led her to ignore her friends' warnings. One night while she was at home, the lights started flickering and the clock struck midnight. Sarah was alone. Her parents were out at a party, and she was stuck in a series of video games. Suddenly, her phone rang. She looked at the screen and saw that the call was from her best friend, Lisa. "That's weird," she thought, knowing that Lisa was home. She decided to answer it. "Hi, Sarah," the voice on the other end of the line said, but it wasn't Lisa's voice. It was deeper and more resonant, like it had an echo. "Who are you?" Sarah asked, feeling a chill run down her spine. "I'm your friend, Lisa. I miss you," the voice replied, but there was something about it that didn't feel right. Sarah hesitated. "Lisa, is that really you?" She received no response. Instead, the voice continued. "Why don't you want to talk to me?" "Because you're not talking like her," Sarah replied, trying to remain calm. The voice laughed softly, an eerie sound that echoed through the room. "You're smarter than I thought. But do you want to know a secret?" Sarah felt her heart race. "No, thank you," she replied, trying to hang up, but her hand shook. The voice continued. "Lisa can't answer. I'm here because she can't." Sarah dropped the phone, her face pale. She looked around, feeling the darkness seem to close in on her. When she finally dared to pick up the phone, she saw that there was a text from Lisa. "I'm in bed. Why are you calling me?" Fear gripped her. She realized something wasn't right. Before she could react, her phone rang again. This time, it was an unfamiliar number. With a mix of fear and curiosity, she answered. "Hello, Sarah," the voice said. It was the same one as before. "You shouldn't have ignored the call. It's too late now." Sarah started to scream, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of laughter coming from the other end. "Don't worry, I just want to play a game." The laughter echoed in her mind, and she felt trapped in a dark corner. As the voice continued to speak, it began to tell her secrets of her life, things no one else knew, revealing disturbing details about her family and friends. It was as if it was in her mind, bringing to light every fear and doubt she had ever had. "Tomorrow, at the same time, I'll come get you," the voice whispered. "Don't worry, it'll just be a little game." The line went dead. A terrified Sarah rushed to call Kevin and Lisa, but the call didn't connect. The darkness in the room seemed to intensify, and the atmosphere became oppressive. Despite her attempts to stay awake, she eventually succumbed to sleep, her mind filled with horrifying images. When she woke up, Daylight was streaming through the window. Sarah was relieved, thinking it had all been a nightmare. However, checking her phone, she saw a text from Kevin. "Are you okay? What happened last night?" Confused, she answered, but when she looked in the mirror, she saw a reflection she didn't recognize. His eyes were dark, almost empty. The clock struck midnight again, and Sarah knew the call would happen again. She braced herself, hoping it was all a misunderstanding, but when her phone rang, she felt an indescribable terror. The voice rang again, but this time it was deeper, more menacing. "Hi, Sarah. I'm here. It's time to play." The door to her room slammed shut, and laughter echoed in her mind. The last thing she saw was the elongated shadow approaching her, before darkness swallowed everything. No one ever saw Sarah again, but neighbors began receiving strange calls at midnight, always with the same voice, always looking for the same girl. The legend of the midnight call grew in Maplewood, and fear settled in everyone's hearts. People began to avoid their phones, but there was one thing they couldn't escape: the sound of laughter echoing through the night. Story number 4: The Wait. It was a cold October night in the small town of Elmwood. The streets were deserted and the moon shone with a dim light, creating long shadows that moved in the wind. Tom, a young man of 25, was waiting for the bus after a long shift at work. He was tired and wanted to get home to relax. As he looked at his phone, he noticed that the clock already read 10:30. The bus should have arrived 10 minutes ago, he thought, frowning. He looked out at the empty street, feeling the cold air make his skin crawl. At that moment, a stranger appeared at the bus stop. It was a brooding-looking man, with a sinister smile that stretched from ear to ear. His messy hair fell over his forehead, and his eyes seemed to glow in the darkness. Tom felt a chill run down his spine. "Are you waiting for the bus too?" the man asked, his voice soft, but there was something strange about it. "Yeah, I should be on my way," Tom replied, feeling the situation growing increasingly awkward. The stranger moved a little closer, keeping his smile, while Tom noticed that his teeth seemed too sharp, like those of a predator. "Don't worry," the man said, his smile not fading. "Sometimes it's better to wait here a little longer. There are things that move in the dark." Tom tried to ignore the comment, searching his mind for an excuse to walk away. "Are you okay?" he asked, feeling like he should get out of this conversation. However, the stranger began to laugh, a deep laugh that echoed in the cold air. "Oh, I'm doing great. But there are others who aren't so okay, especially on nights like this," the man said, looking out at the dark street. The laughter died down, and an eerie silence filled the air. Tom felt his stomach turn. "It's just a madman," he thought, and he forced himself to focus on his phone again. The stranger, however, didn't seem to have any intention of leaving. "You know, there's something special about this bus stop. Many have waited here, but not all have been lucky enough to leave. Some just disappear." Tom looked at the stranger, his eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "It's just a bus stop," he said, trying to remain calm. "Oh no. It's not that simple. This place has history. Those who stay too long often encounter something they can't see, something that feeds on despair." The stranger's smile widened even further, as if he was enjoying the fear that gripped Tom. "Did you know there's a myth about this stop? It's said that those who disappear are called by a special bus that never comes." Tom tensed. "Why are you telling me this?" "I just want the bus to come," he said, feeling trapped in a conversation he couldn't control. "Because waiting can be an eye-opening experience," the stranger replied, leaning a little closer. "Sometimes time stops here. Sometimes fate is darker than we imagine." Suddenly, a noise from the darkness caught Tom's attention. He turned around and saw a shadow moving quickly behind the nearby trees. His heart raced. "See? I told you there were things that moved in the dark," the stranger said, his laughter echoing through the air again. Tom felt an urge to run, but his feet stayed glued to the ground. "Where's the bus?" he asked, trying to sound firm. Don't worry about that. The bus will come when you least expect it. What you should really fear is what's behind you." Tom turned his head once more, and as he did, he felt an icy chill run through his body. The shadows seemed to come to life, and he could see dark silhouettes slowly approaching. He looked back at the stranger, but he had disappeared, leaving only his echoing laughter in the air. Panic gripped him. He started to back away, but the shadows became more visible, taking on grotesque shapes. The bus finally appeared in the distance, but it was different, with flickering lights that didn't look friendly. As the doors opened, the stranger's laughter echoed in his mind, reminding him of the warnings he had given him. Tom realized he had no other choice. He rushed towards the bus, but as he got on, he found himself surrounded by the empty faces of those who had disappeared earlier. The driver, with a smile similar to the stranger's, stared at him. "Welcome, Tom. We knew you would come. Now we are ready for the ride." The doors slammed shut, and Tom felt despair wash over him. The laughter echoed once more in the darkness, as the bus pulled away, leaving behind the empty bus stop, where he had once waited for the last bus of his life. No one in Elmwood ever saw Tom again. Story number 5, The Laughter from the Well. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, there was an abandoned house that everyone avoided. For years it had been said that the place housed something dark, and that on moonless nights a soft, almost childlike laughter could be heard coming from the old well in the backyard. The protagonist of this story, a young boy named Max, had always been skeptical of ghost stories. Still, curiosity led him to investigate the house, convinced that it was just an old legend to scare children. On an October night, he decided to finally face the rumors and check it out for himself. Armed with a flashlight and his phone, Max walked into the yard of the abandoned house. The air felt thick and cold, and the ground creaked under his feet, but that didn't stop him. He soon reached the well, covered in moss and surrounded by a rusty fence that was barely standing. Just as he was about to take out his phone to record, a soft, shrill laugh broke the silence. Max stopped, trying to calm his breathing, and pointed the flashlight at the well. For a moment, he thought it was just the wind, but suddenly, the laughter grew louder, almost mocking, as if someone was watching him from the bottom of the well. Max decided to look out, hoping not to see anything, but as he directed the beam of the flashlight into the dark hole, he noticed something strange. A pair of empty eyes were watching him from the depths, fixed on him, unblinking. Max took a step back, but before he could flee, something in the well murmured his name. His heart was pounding as the laughter increased, bouncing around the inside of the well, as if many voices were mocking him. He tried to run, but his legs seemed nailed to the ground. Then, he felt a cold hand brush his ankle. With all his strength, he managed to move and ran towards the exit, not daring to look back. However, when he reached the street, he realized that he had dropped his phone. Determined not to go back, he abandoned the idea of retrieving it and went home, certain that this would be the last time he would go near the place. The next morning, when he checked his social media from his computer, he noticed something disturbing. On his profile, there was a new video that he didn't remember uploading. It was a blurry recording from the night before, showing the well, and just before the image cut out, a figure slowly emerged from the shadows, with a chilling smile on its face. The video ended with the same laughter he had heard at the well, only this time, it seemed closer, almost in his ear. Story number 6. The Music Box Melody. Casey had found a small music box in an antique shop, hidden behind some dusty books. It had a peculiar, antique look, decorated with engravings of wilted flowers and small rust spots. The lid was made of fogged-up glass, and upon opening it, she discovered a small doll dressed as a harlequin. with a crooked smile painted on its tiny face. The melody it played was soft, but eerie, as if it were out of tune. Still, Casey was enchanted and decided to take it home. That night, she placed the box on her nightstand and listened to it play before going to sleep. However, just as she was beginning to fall asleep, she heard the last chord of the melody repeating itself, slower and without her having wound up the box. She thought it was her imagination, until a light laugh was heard in the room. When she turned on the light, she saw nothing strange. However, the little harlequin in the box seemed to be in a different position, staring at her. The next day, Casey told her friends about it, who just laughed. But that night, as she tried to sleep, the music box started playing on its own again. This time, the melody was louder, as if someone was insistently twisting the string. Casey, frightened, tried to close the lid, but when her fingers brushed the box, the harlequin smiled at her. Casey pulled away, but a chill ran through her body. She looked at the box and saw something terrifying. The little harlequin was pointing at her with a skeletal finger, as if calling her. At that instant, the lights in the room flickered, and the box slammed shut, cutting off the melody. That night, Casey had a nightmare where the harlequin was chasing her, his laughter echoing in her ears. When she woke up, the first thing she saw was the open box, and the music, strangely, playing at full volume. Casey decided to get rid of it. She threw it into the farthest trash can and returned home with a sigh of relief. That same night, however, the melody began to play again in her room. When she turned on the light, there it was, the music box on her nightstand, open, and the harlequin with an even more crooked smile. Casey screamed, but no one heard her. The next morning, when her friends went to look for her, they only found the closed box on the bed, and a small stain of blood on the pillow. When they opened it, they saw the harlequin with a victorious expression, and the melody began to play again, as if he were calling his next victim. Story number 7. The Forgotten Tape. Mark and Lisa Thompson, a young couple from Seattle, had a habit of hunting for relics at garage sales and antique stores. On one of these hunts, Mark found an old video camera, one of those from the 1990s, along with the tape inside. The shop owner, an elderly woman with a raspy voice and shifty eyes, handed it to him saying simply, "What this camera records is not meant to be seen." Mark, intrigued by the comment, decided to buy it immediately. That night, Mark and Lisa connected the camera to their living room TV and rewound the tape to see what it contained. The footage began with an ordinary recording, a man and woman talking in their kitchen. At first, it seemed like just a home video of a couple in their home, but the scenes became increasingly disturbing. The man recorded the woman as she slept, and then showed himself on camera whispering phrases to her in a low, sinister tone. Suddenly, the screen showed the man alone, speaking directly to the camera. His eyes seemed empty, and he began to mutter something incomprehensible, as if he were under some strange influence. The image shook and distorted, and a background noise could be heard, something that sounded like a deep, whispering voice repeating the words, "I'm watching you." Mark tried to turn off the camera, but the device was unresponsive. Suddenly, the image on the screen changed. It now showed a person in the corner of a dark room. That figure was recording from the perspective of someone looking up at a window from outside, and Mark found it eerily familiar. As the camera slowly zoomed in, he recognized with horror that it was the window in his living room. Lisa, her voice shaking, pleaded with him to turn off the tape, but Mark seemed unable to move, mesmerized by what he saw. The image on the screen began to move toward the house, now showing the front door. The video continued to record, and slow, heavy footsteps could be heard, approaching the interior of their home, right towards where they were sitting. At that moment, a loud knock sounded on their living room door. Lisa screamed, and Mark jumped up from the couch, looking towards the door. The tape, however, showed another terrifying image. From the other side of the door, someone was recording through the peephole. The camera on the tape seemed to be looking directly at them from the hallway. The knocks on the door became more insistent and violent. Lisa, paralyzed by fear, begged Mark to call the police. But when he picked up the phone, he discovered that the line was dead, and the cell phone had no signal. Terrified, they both hid in the bedroom, waiting for whatever was outside the house to go away. The television screen showed the last image before it turned off. Someone on the camera seemed to have gotten into their bedroom, focusing directly on them from the other end of the room. The whispering, distorted laughter filled the house. Hours later, when neighbors heard the screams and called the police, they found no trace of Mark or Lisa. Only the camera, with the tape rewound, and one last recording, two figures frozen in the frame, captured from their bedroom doorway, staring into the lens, their expressions pure terror. Story number 8. The Voice Hunter. Michael Larson had an unusual obsession, collecting old voice recordings. He would spend hours scouring thrift stores, garage sales, and internet sites for old tapes, cassettes, and records. One night, while surfing the deep web, he came across a file that caught his eye. The lost recordings, never heard before. The description said it contained recorded voices from a seance in 1945. Without a second thought, Michael downloaded the file, eager to hear what he had captured. That same night, he set up his headphones and immersed himself in the recordings. At first, the voices were hard to make out, distant, reverberant murmurs. But as the audio progressed, the voices became clearer, and it sounded like someone was whispering his name. Michael! He thought it was a coincidence, just a trick of his imagination, but soon he felt a chill run down his spine. The voices kept talking, whispering in a low, distorted tone. Michael pulled out his headphones, unsure of what he was hearing, but somehow the audio kept playing. He checked the equipment, thinking it was a glitch in his system, but the whispers persisted, filling his room with an eerie resonance. One of the whispers, clearer than the others, said, "You are not alone." Michael turned off the computer, but the sound continued, louder now, as if someone was standing behind him. He turned around, shivering, and could see in the reflection of the dark screen the blurry figure of someone standing in the corner of his room, their empty eyes watching him silently. Trying to stay calm, Michael turned on all the lights and searched his room, but found no one. The whispers didn't stop though. This time, they seemed to be coming from different places: the closet, under the bed, the hallway. The whispers repeated his name, growing ever more insistent. Desperate, he decided to go back to his computer to delete the file, hoping that would end the torment. But when he opened the computer, he found a new recording on his desktop titled, Michael 2:47 a.m. Frightened but unable to resist his curiosity, he clicked on the file. To his horror, he heard his own voice speaking in whispers, as if he were responding to someone in a conversation. He had never recorded that file. Still, on the tape, his own voice could be heard saying, "No, I can't. Who are you?" Terrified, he turned off his computer and unplugged it from the power. But the audio continued to play in the room, louder and louder, until the whispers became distorted screams. Michael ran out of his apartment in the middle of the night, convinced that something or someone was chasing him. The blurry figure he had seen in his room seemed to follow him, and every time he looked back, it was closer. Days later, when police entered Michael's apartment following a neighbor's report of screaming, they found no one. Only a computer on with one last audio file, titled, "Thank you, Michael." Story number 9. The Midnight Chat. James Sullivan was a quiet guy, known among his friends for his fondness for mystery forums and late-night chat groups. One Halloween night, while browsing a deep web chat called Midnight Call, he noticed a message that made him uneasy. "Join at 3 a.m. if you want to talk to the dead." Thinking it was a joke, he replied to the message mockingly, but the user simply sent him a link. At 3 a.m., James decided to open the link again. He was met with a blank interface and a text box. On the screen, a message appeared, apparently from a user named The Silent One. "Are you sure you want to know the truth?" James, feeling the adrenaline of the situation, replied yes. Without further warning, the screen went dark and he began to hear an audio transmission, faint and filled with static. It was a female voice, whispery and broken, as if coming from the bottom of a well. It said, "James, I've been waiting for you." James froze. How did she know his name? Nervously, he typed that it was all a joke and that he didn't believe in ghosts. The voice replied, its tone cracked. "Do you remember the accident at the lake?" "It wasn't an accident, James." He felt a knot in his stomach. Years ago, when he was a child, he had had an accident at a local lake that almost cost him his life. But it was impossible for anyone on the internet to know that detail. The voice continued, "I had to stay there, in the water, because you lived." He stood up, leaving the chat open, his hands shaking. He remembered the day at the lake. A friend, Lucas, had died trying to save him. But that was impossible. He had seen Lucas' body, and the case was closed. There was no way that Lucas was behind this sinister transmission. Returning to the computer, he found a message. "Do you want to know what really happened, James? Why did only you come out of the water?" Terrified, James closed the chat and turned off the computer, trying to convince himself that it was just an elaborate prank. However, his phone began to ring. Lucas' name appeared on the screen. He answered, though his voice was shaking, and on the other end he heard the same voice from the chat, this time shouting, "You took my life, James. Now it's your turn to pay." The lights began to flicker, and an unnatural coldness filled his room. Turning, he saw the reflection of a child in the mirror, soaked and with a furious expression. James screamed, running to the door, but his feet seemed anchored to the floor. The voice called out to him, as if from the other side of the wall someone was knocking and begging to come in. The lights finally went out, and James heard footsteps approaching in the darkness, until everything became silent. Days later, police found his apartment empty. Only his computer was still on, displaying a last connection in the midnight call chat, along with a single message. "Lucas, see you soon, my friend." Story number 10. The Unknown Profile. Evan Jacobs was a curious college student and a fan of paranormal stories. The kind of person who stayed up late watching mystery videos and surfing the web looking for something to break the routine. One night, in the middle of Halloween season, he received a friend request from someone he didn't know. The profile was called "I Am Your Friend," and the profile picture showed a blurry figure with a dark mask and a crooked smile. Puzzled and unable to resist the temptation, he accepted the request. Immediately, Evan received a message from the profile. "Hi Evan. Do you remember me?" Although he had never seen that profile, the fact that someone unknown used his name made him uneasy. He responded cautiously, trying to remember if perhaps it was some kind of joke from his friends. The profile responded with a simple, "You and I have a pact, did you forget?" Evan laughed nervously, sure that someone was trying to scare him on Halloween. But before he could respond, he received a picture. The photo showed his room, exactly as it was at that moment. Everything was in the same place, including his backpack on the bed and his laptop on. He felt a chill as he realized that whoever was writing to him was watching him from somewhere. He looked around, closing the curtains and making sure all the doors were locked. He quickly typed, "Who are you? What do you want?" The profile replied, "I'm here to complete our pact." Evan couldn't remember any pact, but he began to feel a deep unease. His phone vibrated with a new notification, and upon unlocking it, he found another photo. He was now in the picture, staring at his phone, his face pale. He turned around, terrified, but his room was empty. However, the picture on his phone clearly showed a figure behind him. right in the corner of the room. His skin crawled, and he began to sweat. Trying to calm himself down, he left the room and went down to the living room. The phone vibrated again with another message. "You can't escape the pact, Evan." His hands shook as he typed. "What pact? I didn't make a pact." But in the back of his mind, he started to remember something. One night years ago, in high school, he had played a summoning ritual with a group of friends as part of a dare. The goal was to make a pact with the man without a face, to whom, according to legend, you sold a year of your life in exchange for a wish. At the time, he hadn't believed in any of that, and had forgotten about the incident, until now. He decided to turn off the phone and leave the house. As he walked down the streetlights began to flicker, and suddenly, his phone turned on by itself, showing a new image. It was him, walking alone on the empty street. The caption read, "Why are you running, Evan? I'm behind you." He turned quickly, but there was no one. However, the feeling of being followed was so intense that he started running, without a clear direction, just looking to escape. He took refuge in a convenience store, explaining to the cashier that someone was stalking him. The man, noticing his nervousness, offered to let him stay until someone could come for him. While they waited, Evan checked his phone, where a final message from "I am your friend" appeared. "Did you really think you could run away from a pact? I always keep my promises." The screen flickered, and then the phone turned off forever. That was the last time anyone saw Evan. The police found his phone in the store, but when they analyzed it, they found no recent conversations or "I am your friend's" profile. Story number 11. The Last Transmission. In a small town in Kansas, summer had begun to fade and the cool air of fall was beginning to set in. Jake Thompson, a passionate amateur radio enthusiast, spent his evenings tuning into stations from around the world. He had an old radio set that he had inherited from his grandfather, and his greatest pleasure was discovering unusual transmissions. One Halloween night, while searching the frequencies for something interesting, he came across a strange, static-filled, distorted signal. The transmission began with a soft, almost whispering voice saying, "This is the last transmission from station XH091. If you can hear me, get away now." Jake, intrigued and a little uneasy, turned up the volume. The voice continued, "I'm not kidding. They're coming. If you're in their way, there's no way to save yourself. You have to get away now." Adrenaline coursed through his veins. It was like something out of a horror movie, but he couldn't help but feel a strange thrill. "Who's talking?" he shouted into his radio, as if he could get a response. The transmission briefly cut off, and then the voice continued, "There's no time for questions. Listen, they have your data. They know where you are." Jake's heart was pounding as he thought of his friends, Mike and Laura, who were at a Halloween party just a few miles from his house. In his mind, the message became more and more realistic. How would they know where I am? He wondered, feeling a little ridiculous considering that someone was watching him. The voice didn't stop though. "If you don't get away from here, they'll get here before midnight. They'll kill everyone in their path. You can't just stand there. You have to run." On impulse, Jake turned off the radio and decided to go find his friends. He quickly dressed, grabbed his jacket, and left the house. As he drove to the party, thoughts of the transmission continued to haunt him. Was it just a Halloween prank? Or was there something more sinister behind that voice? When it came, the atmosphere was festive, with laughter and music. Mike and Laura were in the crowd, enjoying the night. Jake joined them, trying to shake off the uneasiness, but the voice kept echoing in his head. As the night progressed, the lights began to flicker and the music stopped. A cold breeze swept through the place, causing a chill to run down the spines of everyone present. The party, which had been filled with joy, became tense. The crowd murmured, confused by what was happening. Jake felt compelled to share what he had heard. "Guys, there's something weird in the air." He began to explain to them about the broadcast. Mike laughed. "Come on, Jake, it's Halloween. I'm sure it was just a joke. Relax." But Laura, who had been listening intently, asked him, "What if it's true? What if someone really is in danger?" As the clock ticked towards midnight, an ominous sound began to echo from the nearby forest. It was distant screams, mixed with a dull sound that resembled heavy footsteps. Everyone looked towards the forest, their faces pale with fear. "Maybe we should leave," Laura suggested, but the group froze, unable to move. Suddenly, the music started playing again, but it was different. It was a distorted, almost macabre beat. The crowd began to disperse, everyone trying to escape the party. Jake felt a growing pressure on his chest and remembered the words from the broadcast. "They're coming." He took Mike and Laura by the hand, attempting to lead them to his car, but in the chaos, they became separated. The sound grew louder, and the screams came closer. Jake screamed his friends' names, but it was useless. Panic had taken over. Finally, he managed to reach his car, only to find his phone vibrating frantically. It was a notification from a group message. Opening them, he found pictures of himself and his friends, taken from a distance, in which the shadows approaching could clearly be seen. The last image was of a man's silhouette, in the distance, with a sinister smile that showed sharp teeth. Jake froze at the image, and in that moment he realized that the warning was real. The signal he had heard on his radio was not a game, it was a cry for help. He looked into the woods, and could see the figure approaching, shrouded in shadows. Helplessly, he turned the ignition key, but the engine would not start. In that instant, the figure emerged from the darkness. The smile on its face was the same one he had seen in the image. Unable to escape, Jake stared, knowing that the last transmission had not just been a warning, it had been his death sentence. Story number 12. The Cursed Toy. In a quiet Virginia neighborhood, everyday life went on without a hitch. Sam and his little sister, Lily, were inseparable, sharing everything from games to secrets. One day, while exploring their grandfather's attic, they found an old wooden toy. It was a strange-looking puppet, with an eerie smile and eyes that seemed to follow them. Without a second thought, Sam decided to take it home. From the moment the toy crossed the threshold, something changed. Lily became obsessed with the puppet, which she decided to name Mr. Twisty. She would spend hours playing with it, making it dance and talk. However, Sam noticed something strange. Every time Lily played with Mr. Twisty, the atmosphere in the house became heavier, and there were times when the toy seemed to move on its own. One night, Sam was awakened by a thud coming from his sister's room. With his heart beating rapidly, he got out of bed and headed to his room. Opening the door, he found Lily sitting on the bed, holding the puppet, an ecstatic expression on her face. "Look, Sam! Mr. Twisty told me he wants to play," she said, her voice almost a whisper. Sam felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean he said something to you?" he asked, trying to remain calm. Lily smiled, but it wasn't the cheerful smile his brother knew. It was an eerie smile, as if there was something more behind those eyes. That same night, as he tried to sleep, Sam heard soft whispers. It was as if someone was talking, but he couldn't make out the words. He sat up in bed, his heart beating wildly. "It's just the wind," he told himself, trying to convince himself. However, when he looked down the hall, he saw the silhouette of Mr. Twisty, standing in the darkness, staring straight at him. Sam got up and walked to his sister's room. "Lily, wake up," he whispered, but got no response. The little girl was fast asleep, hugging the toy. As he approached, Sam felt a cold sweat on his forehead. The puppet, which had once been just a toy, seemed to be more alive than ever. It was as if it had absorbed some of his sister's energy. the situation became stranger. The next day, Lily did not separate herself from Mr. Twisty. She went to school with him and introduced him to her friends as if he were a real person. Worried, Sam decided to investigate more about the toy. In the library, he found an old book that talked about cursed toys, objects that brought bad luck and could possess those who played with them. That night, Sam tried to get rid of Mr. Twisty. He took him to the nearby forest and buried him. However, when he returned home, he found Lily in the yard, holding the puppet. "Mr. Twisty told me you shouldn't do that," she said in a voice that didn't sound like his sister's. Sam felt terror engulf him. "Lily? Is that you?" she asked fearfully. The little girl smiled, but her eyes were empty. "Mr. Twisty is part of me now," she replied. Sam realized that his sister had changed. She was no longer the same girl he knew. The puppet had taken possession of her. As night fell, he decided he had to face the situation. When he arrived home, he found Lily sitting in the living room with the toy on her lap. "Do you want to play, Sam?" she asked in a voice that sounded strange and distorted. "No! Lily, it's not you!" Sam shouted. At that moment, the puppet began to move on its own, its strings rumbling as if they had a life of their own. Desperate, Sam ran to the kitchen and grabbed a knife, determined to end the terror that had invaded his home. When he returned to the living room, he found the puppet staring at him. "You're a coward," Lily said with a laugh that didn't seem like her own. "Mr. Twisty won't let you go that easily." With a scream of rage and fear, Sam lunged at the puppet and stabbed it. In that instant, a heart-wrenching scream echoed throughout the house, and Lily's body fell to the ground. Sam, stunned and heartbroken, knelt beside his sister. "I'm sorry, Lily," he murmured as terror enveloped him. But there was no response. The puppet, now broken, lay on the floor, but Sam sensed that something dark still lingered in the house. In the night, as the shadows lengthened, a new whisper began to echo through the air. "Sam, let's play!" The puppet had been destroyed, but the horror it unleashed had already taken a new form, one that could never be stopped. Story number 13. The House on the Hill. In a small town in Ohio, a group of friends ventured out to explore an abandoned house that everyone knew about from the stories surrounding it. Legend had it that the house, perched on top of a hill, had been home to a lonely man named Harold, who mysteriously disappeared one stormy night. Locals claimed that Harold's spirit still haunted the house, trapped in his memories of sadness and madness. The group consisted of Mike, the leader of the group, Sarah, the bravest, Tom, the skeptic, and Jenny, the horror story lover. That October night, they decided to bring flashlights and recorders to capture any paranormal activity. Upon arriving at the house, they found rusty doors and broken windows revealing a dusty, dark interior. "This is amazing," Jenny said, as she pointed her flashlight at the graffiti-covered walls. "It's like the ghosts want to communicate with us." Tom laughed skeptically. "It's just nonsense. There's nothing here but debris and cobwebs." However, as they moved forward, a feeling of unease began to envelop them. The temperature dropped dramatically, and a sense of being watched took hold of them. As they explored the ground floor, they found an old living room with furniture covered in dust. In the corner, there was an old piano, and Sarah, always the most impulsive, decided to play a few keys. As the melody echoed, a loud thud sounded from the floor above. Everyone looked at each other, surprised. "Who else is here?" Mike asked, his voice shaking. They decided to climb the stairs, which creaked under their weight. Each step echoed in the heavy air, and a sense of dread began to seep into their hearts. On the second floor, the group found a room with the walls covered in strange drawings and symbols. Mike took his recorder and began to speak. "We're in Harold's house. If there's anyone here, let them come forward," she said, a mix of nervousness and bravery. The recorder picked up a barely audible whisper that said, "Go away." Sarah flinched, and Tom scoffed at the recording. "That was just the wind," she said, though her voice betrayed a hint of unease. The atmosphere grew even heavier though, and the friends began to feel the pressure on their chests. Looking around, they noticed that the symbols on the walls seemed to move, as if they were alive. Without warning, a dark shadow slid across the room, and deep laughter echoed through the walls. "This isn't funny," Jenny screamed, as she tried to back away. But the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. Mike pushed the door shut, but it was firmly locked. "Help! Let us out!" Sarah began to scream, but her screams were silenced by a bone-chilling laugh that filled the air. The lights from their flashlights flickered and went out, leaving them in complete darkness. At that moment, each of them began to experience terrifying visions. Mike saw the image of a lonely man, with a look of despair. Tom saw his family, but they were all staring at him in sadness and horror. Sarah saw an image of herself, trapped and screaming. Jenny saw a figure behind them, a shadow slowly approaching. "No! No!" Mike screamed, but it was too late. The figure lunged at them, and in an instant, the air was filled with a bitter cold. When the light flickered on again, they found themselves in the living room of the house, but something had changed. The piano was playing alone, playing the same tune that Sarah had played. Desperate, they tried to open the door, but it was still closed. The symbols on the walls began to glow with a dim light, and laughter echoed once more, louder and mocking. "You can't escape," a deep voice echoed. "They are trapped here forever." A feeling of hopelessness washed over them. They realized that the house not only held Harold's memory, but had fed on his sadness and madness, and now it had trapped them as well. As screams of horror filled the house, the residents of the hill remained silent, oblivious to the tragedy unfolding within. With each attempt to break free, the house's power intensified, and one by one, they succumbed to its dark embrace. In the end, only whispers remained, lost in the wind, and the house on the hill stood as a dark reminder that some places are meant to be forgotten, but are never truly empty. Story number 14. The Whisper in the Night. In a quiet town in Massachusetts, where autumn had turned the trees red and gold, a group of teenagers decided to spend the night at an old abandoned campsite. The idea came about in a casual conversation between friends at the local cafe. Jake, the most daring of the group, had heard stories about the camp, which had abruptly closed years ago after a series of mysterious incidents. His friends, Emily, Alex, and Lily, decided it would be an exciting adventure. On Halloween night, the group armed themselves with flashlights and snacks, and set out for the campsite. Upon arrival, the atmosphere was eerie. The cabins were run down, covered in ivy and shadows. Fog was beginning to descend, and a strange feeling of being watched hung in the air. "This is going to be epic," Jake said, trying to cheer his friends up, though the unease was palpable. After exploring a bit, they found a cabin that seemed to be in relatively better shape. However, the door was locked with a heavy chain. "Let's break it open," Jake suggested. With a little effort, they managed to open it, and found themselves in a small living room filled with dust-covered furniture. In the center, there was an old radio. Without thinking, Jake turned it on, and the sound of static filled the room. "Turn it off," Lily said, feeling uneasy. But at that moment, the radio began to emit a barely audible whisper. "Do you hear that?" Alex asked, frowning. The whisper grew clearer. "You're not alone." The tension rose, and Jake, with a nervous smile, tried to joke about the matter. "It's just an old recording, nothing to worry about." They decided to sit on the ground, sharing horror stories, while the fog thickened outside.